r/ask Reddit. Teachers of Reddit, what are some positive trends you have noticed in today's youth? University teacher here. My students put in way more effort than I did at their age. Granted, the system has pushed them in that direction as well, but they typically have a better idea of where they want their career to go and are willing to put in the effort to obtain that goal. By comparison, I and my cohort mucked about a bit more. Students are not afraid to just be nice to each other. I teach elementary art, and it is so nice when a kid who is pretty unskilled in art show another kid their work, and instead of getting laughed at, like when I was in school, kids are just so sweet and will say things like, "Wow, I really love that." I hear kids telling other kids, "I think your work is beautiful," or "I really like your ideas." And I just think of when I was in art, kids made fun of my work. In general, I really don't see kids being bullies as much as they were when I was a kid. I went to school in a really nice district too with few problems, but I was bullied. Kids here have a much worse home life than kids at my old school, and while they could choose to take it out on others, they don't. Kids help each other too. They know if a student is special and will try to help that student out. They'll offer to walk them to the bathroom or help them with their drawing, or very politely tell them to be careful with things. Girls ask boys out more often. Boys are starting to expect girls to be more frank and straightforward with what they want more often. Other than that, just like my colleagues, generally kinder, more generous, understanding of differences, mature. On the other hand, I find them generally more sad, maybe more cynical, and overall quite happily pessimistic toward the future. A kind of "ah, we are so fucked" vibe I feel sometimes. Edit. I got to say that I teach in France. It has its importance. They are generally independent and self-reflective. When I first started teaching, I thought I had simply lucked out getting students who were consistently bright, engaged and curious, but having now taught at 3 different universities on 2 different continents, it seems to be a general trend across universities. They are also, as noted elsewhere, generally kind and empathetic, and both my male and female students are usually pretty emotionally mature. I'm a teacher at a high school in Missouri. All of the stereotypes you hear or see in rural high schools are still prevalent. However, almost every group works harder academically. It is no longer cool to get F's and fail. Even country boys who will never leave the farm or go to college care about getting passing grades. 600 plus students in our high school, by the way. Taught art for a spell a while back. I know that a lot of people say shit like, "Oh, these children and they're all consuming technology," but a lot of kids are so excited about learning to make things using their devices. A big part of the sculpture class I taught was to make a statement using a 3D printed sculpture. Even take something like Minecraft. I know it's a big meme, but it's a huge sandbox to build things. I remember being a young teen. When I came out, we would get so complex with our builds. Kids are learning to create in an incredibly different way. It can be really irritating when they latch onto something and run it into the ground, but they love learning new things and creating new things in an increasingly relevant way. I teach on the college level. From what I can tell, many of them seem more open to having a variety of kind of friends. Where I teach has a big hookup and party culture, but they seem to have genuine cross-gender friendships despite that, and in my opinion, that's been good for them. Edit. I feel like I should specify, since this comment blew up, that this is dependent on who's available to you in terms of variety. For example, I went to a very racially diverse undergrad and had all kinds of friends. My students go to a very white college and do not have racial diversity in their friendships as a result, but I think a fair amount that is structural. I also feel kind of like the bad guy here, but it's interesting that men in fraternities came up, because a lot of times they are the exception with my students. They'll really only hang out with their brothers, and depending on the fraternity, can be really awful to women. As an ex-college prof, contrary to belief, they seem better at helping each other out and giving their point of view on a topic or idea. When teaching before, they would try to explain to each other how I explained them to do it. Now, they go look for other ways, both good and bad, on YouTube and explain different things they have found on YouTube. This mentality can be bad if it doesn't always hold true. I taught math, but other ways of explaining I hadn't thought about. It's refreshing to see the more open sharing of ideas. This may be that they listen better to their peers than to me, but if it helps, I'm not complaining. I'm a middle school social studies teacher. The students I've taught, whether at a school that was generally dysfunctional or at one that runs really smoothly, question authority and speak out against perceived injustices in a way that kids in my generation, I'm in my early 30s, did not. They are absolutely aware of the spread of misinformation and attempts to control people's thinking through propaganda, and they are massively better prepared to see through it than any generation before them. This is the only generalization I can really make. To be honest, I've been at schools with negative cultures where the kindness that I'm reading other people talk about in their responses was non-existent. I'm at a school now that is so relentlessly positive and loving that if I hadn't taught at other schools I might think it was a generational thing. For a lot of things, it really is dependent on the neighborhood and school culture. I've been coaching basketball for the youth for over 12 years. The main youth league I do any kid is allowed to play. One thing for me that has been inspiring is kids being more sensitive and positive with kids who are mental handicapped. Even just the small things like making sure that kid gets the ball every once in a while and they will cheer on that kid as well. Treating him or her as an equal and as a teammate instead of ever making fun of them. In my high school, around 2000, the shitty students voted the one kid who was brave enough to come out as gay as prom king just to be assholes. He was the school joke, and it devastated him. Fast forward to about 2012, I was chaperoning the prom dance at the high school my sister worked at in the same city, and they elected an openly trans student as prom king, or queen, and everybody loved him and supported him. Basically the same thing. But one was to make someone feel utterly shitty, and one was because everyone loved and supported the kid. It blew my mind that so much had changed in 12 years. I found that kids these days are more aware of the needs of the job market and what they need to do to stand out. They are aware of internships and networks and hobbies that will help them get ahead more than my generation, millennial. They volunteer more as a result and pursue their talents or interests. I felt that when I went to school we were told that as long as we went to uni we would graduate to a successful job, and post-financial crisis found that that was no longer the case. My students now know that a degree is not enough and have a clearer idea of what they want. My students range in age 16 to 35, averaging in the early 20s. The youngest are way kinder and more social. An example, I was talking to a student age 17 before the class started, and we somehow talked about it's 2018. Why don't we already have? I shared that my biggest wish for streaming is a search engine that will tell me where I can stream any given show or film. To which my student countered that a feature he really missed was being able to watch a movie with someone else in different places. It should have a voice chat function and synchronous playback, so you could fast forward or pause together. We had this when I was a teen. It was called TV and a phone, but nobody did it. Edit, the search tool should take location into account. I teach middle school art. The students are definitely more accepting and will often shut down someone being rude before I even get the chance to do so. There is also a more concern about getting work done and getting a good grade. Students will also often tell other students who are fooling around to sit down and do the project like everyone else. Peer pressure is very effective in curbing behaviors. I've seen students who I struggled to get to sit and work actually do so after getting chewed out by a peer. I've also seen students break up fights quickly rather than stand around and whoop. There is more homogenization, less cliques. Students have things that they like and will sit with other students who like the same things, but you'd be surprised by who's talking about it. Someone who in the past might have been a prep and one who might have been an emo will sit there and go off about K-pop and who they like best from BTS. All of this is mostly a comparison between now and my experiences in school. Graduated high school in 2007. A lot of students are a lot more open-minded Recently I had a student put up her hand in the middle of my lesson and say, "Miss, do you have a boyfriend?" Completely out of the blue, so naturally I was annoyed and just looked at her very stern and said, "Do you think that's an appropriate question to ask?" She thought for a second before replying, "Sorry, I meant do you have a partner?" I couldn't even be mad after that. The total open-mindedness masked the inappropriateness of the original question. I got a good laugh afterwards at the notion the only issue I may have with that question was its political correctness. Plus she later explained her reason for asking, which was pretty funny in itself.